Let's talk about feedback. Giving feedback and having difficult conversations can be a little bit uncomfortable, and it could even damage a relationship if you don't do it the right way. Plus, it gets even more difficult if the person you're talking to is hostile or has low emotional intelligence. And that's because giving feedback is a very personal thing, and it's all about the approach. Just like being invited to someone's house, you can't just barge in like you own the place. You have to follow the right social etiquette. So today, I'm going to share the front door approach to feedback, a 4-step model from my Minimalist Management and Leadership program. It's basically the social etiquette for giving feedback that's very similar to going to someone's house for the first time. You can use this approach to get more performance from your teams, to put a damper on behaviors that drive you nuts, to help you interview candidates, and even to let people go, all while maintaining positive relationships and without creating any resentment. In fact, when you use these approaches, most people will gain respect and admiration for you. Speaking of admiration, if you like what you see in this video, show me some love by hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and subscribing. And don't forget to check the description for free workshops and downloads. Now let's go ahead and dive in to how you can give effective feedback as a manager or as a team member. The first thing you have to do is get your mind right for the approach. A lot of people think of providing feedback as something that's going to hurt the other person, but the truth is that feedback is a gift. People need feedback to grow, and growth is one of our core human needs. So by giving someone feedback, you're actually offering them an opportunity to improve their happiness and well-being. And the truth is that most of the time, people already know something isn't right before you give them feedback, because you start to act different when you're worried about approaching the situation. You become uncomfortable and they pick up on that. And you know what's worse than knowing what's wrong? It's knowing that something is wrong but not knowing what it is. You know what I'm talking about. Once you know what's wrong, you can deal with it. But when you just get silence, it can be excruciating. So when you're giving people feedback, remember that feedback is a gift and it will be much easier on both of you. Now, the second key to effective feedback is asking permission. It's like knocking on the door before someone invites you in. Imagine if someone just walked up to you and said, "Hey, your breath stinks." Whoa, easy there, cowboy. Them there's fighting words. Now look, just about anybody would be put off by that approach. So let's analyze what just happened. It wasn't the comment, it was the approach. When the other person walked up and gave you feedback without permission, it's like barging into your house without knocking. And by doing that, they put themselves in a position of authority and simultaneously lower your status. Our natural response as human beings is to go into a defensive position when someone does anything to lower our status. And when people are offended or they go on the defensive, they're much harder to communicate with and to influence because there's no trust. So instead of just walking right in and giving feedback, you need to ask permission first, literally. When you ask permission, you're elevating the other person's status by giving them control. A simple phrase like, "Would you be open to some feedback?" or "Could I share something with you?" is all it takes. If they don't want the feedback at that moment, they can say no. And if they do, you should respect their decision because they won't be open to anything you have to say after that anyway. Now, by the way, this approach eases the tension in any environment, including relationships, with your kids, with your parents, with your friends, or even if you're giving feedback to your boss. Now, it doesn't automatically mean that people will take the feedback, but at least they'll be in the best possible state to receive whatever it is you have to say. Once you have permission, the door is open for you to share your thoughts and you may enter. During this portion, your duty is simply to inform, and it's important to share facts and not attack the person. Going back to the bad breath example, you could say something like, "Your breath is not really smelling so great today," or "Your breath is quite strong today and it's a bit distracting." These kind of comments provide information but leave out any personal opinions or judgments about the other person. But you wouldn't want to say something like, "You have the worst breath in the history of bad breath," because that brings in personal judgments and it feels like more of an attack that's designed to hurt than inform. In the work environment, I would generally avoid sharing feedback about how things make you feel here, because even though it can be a fact that things make you feel a certain way, some people may not respond well to what you have to say because they don't agree that it should make you feel that way. So if your boss is constantly giving you work at 5 o'clock on Friday, I wouldn't say, "When you give me work at 5 o'clock on Friday, it makes me feel like I'm a servant and not valued." Instead, I would say something like, "When you give me work at 5 o'clock on Friday, it cuts into my family time and I would like to find alternative solutions." See the difference? Cool deal. After you've established the feedback, there should be another checkpoint. If the person seems open to continuing the conversation, it's okay to do so, but don't dwell too long. It's kind of like getting invited upstairs for a tour of someone's house. It's okay to glance around, but you wouldn't just hang out there in the bedroom and start looking through their drawers. Just get whatever needs to be shared on the table, then move on to clarifications and solutioning if it's appropriate and if the person is still open. If not, end the conversation. If you still need to discuss things but the other person is getting uncomfortable, ask if you can pick up the conversation another time. It's always important to maintain empathy throughout your feedback conversation. In fact, if you ask permission and practice empathy, it's hard to go wrong with giving any kind of feedback. But it's especially important to practice empathy with hostile individuals, even though our natural human reaction is to get defensive or aggressive when people are acting out. Think about it this way. If you're fighting a fire, would you grab some gasoline and throw it on top? Or would you go for some water or a fire extinguisher to put the fire out? Empathy is like a fire extinguisher for hostility. Try saying something like, "It seems like you've been a bit frustrated lately. I'm curious what's bothering you." Ask a few of those questions, and then after the person calms down, you can ask for permission and use the techniques that we talked about earlier in the video. Now, this technique is perfect in interviews to save yourself some time. Now let's talk about a couple of examples. When I do interviews for my consulting and training team, I always start with a presentation. Before the presentation, I tell the person that's interviewing that afterwards, I'll give them some feedback if they're open to it. After they're finished, I ask them how they think they did and if they would like the feedback. I also tell them that I'm offering the feedback because I wish more people would do the same for me. Now the door is open and I've established that I'm giving them feedback with compassion and empathy. The feedback portion may go something like this. "Thanks for your presentation, Chanel. I liked how you grabbed my attention with the opening, but after that, the flow kind of broke down, and for me, I found it a bit hard to follow. We have an incredibly high standard for our clients, and I have to make decisions based on what I see here today, so I don't think you're going to be the right fit for the position. But I would encourage you to keep going on this course because you have a lot of potential." Is there anything else that you'd like to share with me today? You might be surprised how often people thank me for that feedback and then follow me on social media and maybe even recommend my services for other organizations. When it comes to underperformers, you can use a very similar process. I recall one guy that I worked with that was constantly producing bad results, and his management wanted me to see if I could get through to him. I had a conversation that went something like this. "Hey Steve, can we chat? I have some things that I'd like to share with you." Of course, he gives me his permission. Then I say something like, "Some of the folks in the organization aren't very happy with your performance recently. They've noticed that the quality of what you're producing isn't where they want it to be. But I can tell that you really want to succeed, and I want to do whatever I can to help." Now that opened the door for the conversation, and he let me in. He told me he was working on getting better, and we discussed some options. The whole conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes and actually strengthened our relationship. It really doesn't matter what the situation is. If the person can be reasoned with, the front door approach will help you get through to them. In the rare case where people don't let you in, you can still be happy knowing that you've attempted to give the person a gift, and at the end of the day, it's up to them if they want to take it or not. I'd love to hear your feedback on this video in the comments, good or bad, and don't forget to check the description, like, subscribe, and ring the bell for all the latest updates.